So this is the next in a series of webinars from experts who have been willing to talk with our audience about their particular areas of interest. Today, Paul is going to be talking about cognitive content marketing, the path to a more artificially intelligent future. And I wanted to just say that I first heard Paul speak a couple of years ago at a conference, and he was so helpful in understanding where artificial intelligence is and the process that we might see unfold in the world of marketing. So I learned a ton from him. He recommended some super books that I went home and I think I actually ordered one during the session to read. So he knows what he's talking about when it comes to marketing. He's the founder and CEO of PR 2020, the author of the Marketing Performance Blueprint and the Marketing Agency Blueprint. He's a consultant who's worked with hundreds of organizations that run the gamut from startups to Fortune 500 companies. And probably most relevant to today's conversation, he's the creator of the Marketing Artificial Intelligence Institute and Marketing Score. So I'm looking forward to learning more about him from him on the topic of artificial intelligence. Paul, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. So everybody can see my screen, Susan? You good?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay. All right, well, then let's get started. So today we're going to talk about artificial intelligence in content marketing. And Susan, I'm not going to be able to see questions during, but please go ahead and submit the questions, and Susan's going to moderate that for us. And then we'll come back on at the end, and we'll do probably 15 minutes or so of going through Q&A. So if you have questions as we're going, don't hesitate to throw them in there. We'll get to as many as we can. And then if there are questions we don't get to answer, I'll coordinate with Susan and we'll try and answer those for people, and then she can send them out by email. So I'm going to kind of walk through our background with AI, how we got to where we are today, and why it's become such a focus of where I'm putting a lot of my energy moving forward for our agency and for the industry, really. So I actually started a slight obsession with AI around 2011 when IBM Watson won on Jeopardy. And then shortly after that, I bought a book called Automate This, which may be the one that Susan's referring to that she bought during my talk. And it just talks about the disruption of industries with intelligent algorithms. And so I started looking at like, wow, this is really fascinating. I have no idea how this actually works or what AI really is. But if it's happening on Wall Street and in healthcare and in logistics and transportation, like why wouldn't it eventually happen in marketing? And so I started down this path for a few years of trying to understand what this technology really was. And then in 2015, I was at South by Southwest, and I attended a panel session where the executive editor of the Associated Press and the CEO of a company called Automated Insights were talking about how the Associated Press was writing its earnings reports using natural language generation technology, a type of AI. And they had gone from publishing 300 earnings reports a quarter written by humans to 3,000 a quarter written by machines. And so I sat in the audience and I thought, oh my gosh, like we create content for clients. This is basically what my business is. Can we use AI to do that? And more specifically, we write a ton of blog posts. And so I was just curious, like, will AI write blog posts for us? Can we go from writing 15 blog posts a month to 1,500 using machines? So I'll come back to the answer to that question in a little bit, but this is how I started in 2015 and really became truly obsessed to the point where it's the thing I wake up thinking about at night and oftentimes get out of bed in the morning to go work on. So what is it is a really good starting point. If you ask 10 AI experts, you're going to get 10 different definitions of artificial intelligence. My favorite, because of its simplicity, is from a guy named Demis Hassabis. He is the co-founder and CEO of DeepMind, which was acquired by Google in 2014 for north of $600 million. And he defines it as the science of making machines smart. And I'll explain a little bit more of what that actually means, because even as simple as that is, it's kind of abstract, but it'll make more sense as we go. And then I like to add, which in turn augments human knowledge and capabilities. So this is a theme I'm going to come back to throughout, that no matter how advanced this stuff is, how at times overwhelming it can appear to marketers, especially if this is one of the first times you're really hearing about it, it's largely going to enhance what you're capable of doing in the near future. So from a visualization standpoint, artificial intelligence is kind of this umbrella term that then encompasses things like machine learning and deep learning and natural language processing and natural language generation. So you hear all these terms. And the thing I'll tell you is you don't have to understand them all. It's taken me literally years to develop a true comprehension of what each of these things are and how they work. You don't ever necessarily have to get to that point. All you really need to do as a marketer is understand what's possible with these technologies, and that you're going to start seeing them integrated into the tools you're using. And it's just really helpful to understand what the potential is of them. So the most common terms you will hear related to artificial intelligence is machine learning and deep learning. Machine learning is a type of artificial intelligence. Some people will use them as being synonymous. Try and avoid confusion. Just think AI umbrella term, machine learning, deep learning underneath that. And we'll come back to some of these terms throughout today. The other thing we'll touch on is an algorithm. And so again, we think of algorithms in a coding sense in terms of building software. An algorithm really is a set of instructions. And in the case of marketing software, it's telling a machine what to do. So you actually write algorithms all the time as a marketer. Now, the key is with AI, and specifically with the machine learning component of AI, the machine can actually start to write its own algorithms. It can get smarter on its own and actually learn. And so I'm going to show you an example of that. So let's take the webinar you signed up for today. Now, when a visitor registers for the webinar, there's a series of things that are triggered. These have been defined by a marketer. So in Susan's case, GoToWebinar probably had some automated, sending out a reminder out on 48 hours before and 24 hours before. And so those are kind of already built in. But again, someone set an algorithm to do that. The machine isn't figuring out to do that on its own. And then if Susan wants to send follow-up emails, she's going to go in and say, okay, they attended, so I'm going to send these 3 emails, and I'm going to include the video, and I'm going to do all these things. So as a marketer, she's going through and setting the rules of how people are going to be marketed to. But the challenge comes in with what if there were 1,000 registrations today? How in the world would one person visualize the best way to communicate and personalize the experience for those 1,000 people? The answer is you wouldn't. You can't. The human brain literally isn't wired to be able to look at 1,000 individual things in a reasonable amount of time and figure out the best way to personalize an experience, because they may be existing BuzzSumo customers versus prospective BuzzSumo customers, maybe an agency, maybe a marketer, maybe an educator. You don't know. And in an ideal world, you should know, and you should actually treat those people differently based on who they are and what their interest levels are and where they're at in the buyer journey. So this is where artificial intelligence excels. It takes these really time-intensive, data-driven tasks, and it intelligently automates them. It makes the process better, and then it learns on its own 24/7 without ever having to rest, and it keeps improving the process. So I'm going to give you a sense of how this actually is happening all around you, and you may not be realizing it. So AI is actually, throughout your daily life, you may be interacting with artificial intelligence dozens, if not hundreds of times every day, and it's only going to accelerate beyond that. So an example would be in Facebook. If you upload a photo to Facebook and it says, would you like to tag Keith, as the example here, it's using facial recognition software to know that that's Keith. I didn't tell it it's Keith, and no human was behind there looking at that photo and saying, is this Keith? The machine itself has learned to recognize human faces and actually figure out who it is. Another example of this, if anyone's, I just had it happen to me last week, but if you've gone into photos on your iPhone or on your Mac, Apple is now using this to recognize faces in your entire photo library. So it'll pop up a face and say, is this, like it happened with me with my daughter, it said, who is this? And it showed me a picture of her today, like I took 2 weeks ago. And I said, well, that's Isla. And then it popped up 12 more photos with check marks on them and said, is this Isla too? And it was photos of her from when she was 10 days old to 2 weeks ago. And what it was doing was training the machine to recognize Isla. And now every photo she's in from now forward, it will know that that's her. That's artificial intelligence. There's no human coding that. There's no human knowing that that's Isla. And so you start to see this everywhere. So as content marketers, Google is certainly, Google states that they're an AI first company. They said that back in 1999, but it wasn't really until the last 12 months that they've been much more upfront about everything they do is infused with artificial intelligence. So when you conduct a search, or if you use voice search, or if you do it with Siri or Alexa, the machine doesn't understand human language. It's using types of artificial intelligence called natural language processing to listen to your words or see your words, understand what they mean, and then produce a response. And then that's the natural language generation part. It's actually producing either a voice or a text or whatever it may be. And then when you conduct a search, like the things you find on the page or whether or not your content you create is found in search engines is in large part dictated by artificial intelligence. So again, humans at Google aren't necessarily coding it saying, make this the first result. There's artificial intelligence that's figuring out the best result, the most relevant result to show people. Another really cool example of it that you probably have used and didn't know you were using it for this is if you go into Gmail on your phone and someone says, like in this example, Sandy sends me an email, you want to hit up a partner party at 6:30, it recommends responses at the bottom. And I just click, yeah, I'm down, that's fine. That's completely artificial intelligence. It's reading the email, it's understanding what she's asking, and it's recommending 3 potential responses. They call this smart replies. And there's a team of 35 engineers at Google led by an AI thought leader, Ray Kurzweil, working on this problem. And they're working on things much, much larger than 3 to 5 word responses in your emails. But it's a starting point because it enables them to train the machines to understand human language and create human language. If you watch Netflix, 75% of all shows that you watch on Netflix are for some AI generated algorithm. So Netflix uses them to recommend shows, but they actually also use AI to create the shows. They use AI to figure out what topics will be of interest to people, characters, plot lines, all these things. And then they actually produce shows based on algorithms telling them it'll be success. The Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos of Amazon, who is a massive investor in artificial intelligence. The Washington Post uses something called Heliograph that they built that produces stories. They debuted it at the 2006 Summer Olympics, and they were writing stories for every event that was occurring with machines. And then they used it in the 2016 elections to do the same thing for races across the country. And they're now doing it with high school sports. So I think they've written over 850 high school sports stories, specifically football, using their Heliograph natural language generation engine. They also surface content recommendations using it. They do all kinds of things with it. And then probably the best example is Amazon. So again, everything you do on Amazon, you can see all the highlighted areas. They're looking at, on Alexa, they know things we've asked for, things we've searched for with our voice. They know music you've listened to, videos you've watched, your Prime accounts tracked. They recommend things related to what you viewed. They give you more things to consider. And you can see in my case, there's like 6 books on AI. So it's obviously pretty accurate. They do shopping trends, new for you. They're trying to predict what you're going to buy next or get you to buy it next using all kinds of artificial intelligence. So the message here is that your life is already machine assisted. It is literally infused with artificial intelligence and you don't even realize you're using it. And the marketing is going to be that way. It's quickly becoming that way. And so at times you may go looking for AI solutions to challenges, but in more cases than not, you're actually going to start using it and not even be aware that that's what's happening. So as we've kind of seen this space developing, we toyed with different things we could do. And first I looked at building software to try and, intelligently automate marketing strategy, which is a whole nother webinar on its own. But we decided not to try and get into the software business because it's just not what we do. I'm not a developer. I don't have a PhD in computer science. It's not our thing, but we looked at it and said, well, we're more uniquely qualified to tell the story of artificial intelligence. So we launched the Marketing Artificial Intelligence Institute a year ago this month to do just that. And as part of that, we've now written probably north of 110 blog posts, and about a third of them have been spotlights on AI-powered companies. And what we do is ask the same 8 questions of each of these companies, like how are they using artificial intelligence? What are the limitations? What's the potential? What are the use cases for marketers? And we're trying to understand the market. And so what you can see is of the 32 we've done, they have a combined 586 million in funding, and that's not including about 7 of them who don't share their funding publicly. So you can see some examples here of the amount of money that's pouring into these organizations that are largely using artificial intelligence to make marketing more efficient and effective in all kinds of different ways. And so we'll touch on some of these in a bit, but one general rule to follow in business is follow the money. And so for us, this was part of an effort to try and say, well, is there more money pouring into AI? And if so, while we may not be seeing a ton of advancements yet or disruption yet, it may be coming. And so we're actually tracking over 500 companies total, and those ones have about half of them have publicly known funding totaling over 2.9 billion. So the answer to us was like, okay, there's a massive amount of money going into this space. It's certainly worth following and trying to figure out. Now, in the process of doing all these interviews and doing dozens of demos and talking with a lot of these organizations, what we've come to realize is many of them actually aren't that intelligent yet. And I don't mean that in a bad way. AI is at the very, very beginning of where it's going to take us, which is why being on this webinar or starting to look into it yourself is now is the ideal time. It may seem daunting, but most marketers, the vast majority of marketers, have no idea what AI is or how it actually works. And so you have a chance now to actually get ahead of the curve a bit and start understanding it while the technology is still in its early stages of development. The other thing we struggled with early on, going back to November of last year, is how to understand the use cases for this. Like, what are all the ways that you can currently use it? What are the tools built to do? And where are the other areas where it may come? And so recently, I think we debuted this in September at Content Marketing World, we developed this 5 Ps of AI framework. And this is what I'm going to spend the rest of the time in this webinar kind of walking you through how to really visualize and think about ways artificial intelligence can affect your brand and your career moving forward. So the first stage is the planning stage. Now, this is probably between planning and performance, which we'll touch on at the end, is probably the most immature of the phases. And what I mean by that is that the tools are the least intelligent here, or the least amount of money has gone into this area because they're the hardest area. So when you think about planning and actually coming up with strategies and figuring out what to do next, that's really hard for a machine. It can do it in isolated instances, like, for example, HubSpot now has something called their content strategy tool. So they're injecting some machine learning into this product that's actually helping you figure out how to create topic clusters and pillar content within your site, which they've kind of moved towards as a recommended approach to search engine optimization. And within that tool, again, as a marketer, you don't know or care that machine learning is active, but it is, and it's actually making your content strategies smarter without you even realizing you're using it. Another example would be capturing competitive intelligence. So again, I'm going to talk in terms of use cases here. So the first was discovering keywords and building topic clusters. This one, capturing competitive intelligence, a type of planning that has a use case where tools are being specifically built. So CRAN is actually created by a guy, Jonah Lopin, who was one of the early employees at HubSpot. He was actually one of the first 10 employees there. And he left and created this company that enables you to monitor the online digital footprint of your competitors, and that includes their sites, any changes to the sites, any changes to landing pages, promotions, all this information that prior to this, and again, they're using all kinds of artificial intelligence to do this. Prior to this, if you wanted this kind of intelligence into a competitor or a series of competitors, you're looking at hundreds of hours of work that they've automated for you by simply selecting which ones you want, which domains you'd like to monitor. So that's a way you can actually start using AI without having to build your own. Another would be Pathmatics, which is a company out in Santa Monica. They take the digital ad footprint of your competitors or any brand you want to monitor, really, and they'll show you the creative they're running online. They'll tell you how much they're spending, how many impressions they're creating. They'll show you the ad networks they're buying through. So again, it's using artificial intelligence to do stuff 10 years ago we couldn't have even done outside of manually trying to do this, and they're enabling you to do it. Analyzing existing content is a great way to look at it. So BuzzSumo doesn't have a bunch of machine learning injected into their product yet, but they do have all kinds of interesting graphs and charts. So if you just are a BuzzSumo customer and you want to go in there and look at analysis, you can go in and start looking at breakdown by networks and top content and top authors, and it's all really great data. The other thing BuzzSumo enables, though, is for you to export that data in a CSV format. And then what you can do is actually marry it with an AI tool like IBM Watson Analytics. And there's a free version of Watson Analytics. So if you want to start playing around with AI yourself to see what's possible, this is a cool way to blend BuzzSumo with IBM Watson Analytics to enhance the reporting you have access to. And so in this case, I actually took Content Marketing Institute and I exported 12 months of blog post data out of BuzzSumo, cleaned up the spreadsheet a little bit, and then imported it into IBM Watson Analytics. And then they have this option to hit Explore. And now all I did was type in total shares, which is one of the column headers that BuzzSumo exported. And what you see here is IBM Watson is actually recommending questions to ask of your data. So rather than you going in and saying, I want to see these 3 reports, it's looking at your data and suggesting things that it thinks might be really interesting for you to explore within that data set. So it starts to enhance what you're doing and maybe gives you different paths to go down. This is an example of once I chose total shares by author name, it also then exports visualizations. And you can see in Content Marketing Institute's case, they've got 9 of their authors account for half of their total shares for the year. And then I went in and I was like, okay, like LinkedIn shares by author name, and our own Susan Moeller is there as the leading one because she had written a blog post for Content Marketing Institute related to content on LinkedIn, and it became the most shared piece of content on LinkedIn on Content Marketing Institute. So again, it's just, you don't have to understand AI to understand this is kind of a cool use case where you can go in and learn things about your data you didn't have before. Production is the next one, and this goes back to my original question of can we create content using AI? The answer is actually sort of, and I'll explain in a minute. So curating content would be a specific use case under production, and there's all kinds of cool tools in this space. Curata was one of the early ones. I think they've been around for, gosh, probably 10 years now, and they have all kinds of capabilities internally to build these intelligent tools, and they're just baking this content, the capabilities right into their tools. So again, you may look as like, I need to curate content. You don't care if machine learning is involved, but machine learning is what's making it possible. Another would be writing email subject lines. This one is actually kind of cool. Now, I have not used this tool, but I saw the founder speak and we've looked at the tool, and they claim that their machine generated email subject lines perform better than human written subject lines 98% of the time. So what it does is it actually looks at your content and recommends subject lines, and then it gives you some basic insights into why it thinks a certain subject line will perform better than others. So rather than you sitting there and coming up with 10 variations, then A/B testing, the machine will actually recommend what to write, kind of run its own models as to which one's going to perform best, and then it lets you go ahead and do it. Another, and this is a really good entry point for people, would be like assessing your content as you're writing it. So there's a number of tools in this space. A lot of people may use Grammarly. Like I have the Grammarly extension in my Chrome browser that assesses writing as you're doing it. Atomic AI is another one. And what they'll do is they're actually reading, sorry, jumping around here. They're reading the content as you're writing it. They're using natural language processing, again, a type of AI, to assess your writing on the readability of it. They have something called an atomic score, where it's actually trying to get you to reach a certain score based on a number of factors. So it's not changing the content for you, it's not writing the content for you, but it's making your content better. Another one in a kind of a similar space, but more on an enterprise level, would be acrolinks. And what they'll do is they'll assess the text for grammar, sentiment, tone, style. They'll train the machine to adhere to brand guidelines. So if you're a massive enterprise and you have 1,000 writers in 6 countries, their system can actually be trained to ensure that all of those 1,000 writers write to the same standards, and they'll measure and score the content as they're doing it. That gives you all kinds of abilities to go back and look at the performance of your writers and how they're improving over time. So again, stuff you couldn't do unless you just hired 100 editors in-house and trained them all to assess content in the exact same way. You couldn't even do this before AI enabled it. And then this one goes back to my original, can we create content at scale? What you can do is, so this is Automated Insights. This is the company I mentioned I saw speak at South by Southwest. What their tool enables you to do is take structured data, and what that means is rows and columns. So you can see the example here of, these are financial reports for like Nike and Apple and Amazon. It can take a single row of data and tell a story that you train it to tell. And what I mean by that is, when you import this set of data, you're going to then see a blank screen. You have to go through and create the template narrative of what you want the story of that data to tell. So during Q3, Apple was up 25%, which blew away Q3 numbers from the previous year. You have to write all that narrative and then give it synonyms and branching marks. It's actually a wildly intensive process for humans. But for me, this is a whole new type of content marketing and journalism and writing that most people in the industry don't even know exists. So if you can kind of blur the lines between data science and journalism, there may be entire new career paths for people to tell stories at scale using data. Another really practical example is, if you have a ton of images on your site, AI can be trained to recognize those images. So a machine has no idea, in this case, whether it's a turtleneck or a t-shirt, or it doesn't know a chair from a table. Like, machines have to be trained to distinguish images. They don't know things. So an example I would give is like a 10-month-old. If you said that's a dog to a 10-month-old, and the 10-month-old then saw it wag its tail and bark, it's going to probably recognize every other breed of dog it ever sees moving forward. For a machine to know the difference between a dog and a cat and a horse and whatever else has 4 legs and a tail, it needs to see millions and millions of images and be taught to distinguish between them. So that's why, like, the things that are easy for humans are actually really hard for machines. And so you do things like this company Clarify that actually trains these neural nets. They train using AI to recognize, and then it looks at probabilities of something being correct. So on the right-hand side, you can see under apparel in that box, turtleneck, 97.9 probability that it's a turtleneck. If you go down to the bottom, tube top, it's a 37% probability. So the machine still doesn't actually know that's a turtleneck. It just, based on probabilities, thinks that it's a turtleneck. So if you have 100,000 images on your site, the only way to previously say this is a turtleneck is for a human to go through and tag every photo of a turtleneck. You could unleash this algorithm, this AI tool on a site, and it would in theory be able to actually tag every image on your site automatically, kind of like the example I gave of Apple with their Photos tool, where it's automatically knowing to tag things and people. And so just to show you, like, this isn't all futuristic stuff. There are companies like Coca-Cola, who granted probably have far more budget than most people attending the call, but they have a lot of money to throw at experimentation, and they see this being a huge part of where they're going to go, with AI actually like choosing music and updating social media, writing scripts. It's probably not there yet, but people with enough money to put towards building these use cases can likely do them in the near future. From a personalization standpoint, this is where most of the money has gone. Most AI tools we see are trying to do some variation of personalization, because it goes back to that Amazon example. I like to say it's kind of the Amazonification of marketing. You're trying as a marketer, as a brand, as an agency, to enable the organization to have these one-to-one experiences with consumers, but to have it intelligently done. Otherwise, it's an immense amount of work. So here's an example, again, using automated insights, where they're taking the Orlando Magic's data and sending out these personalized emails to people. So in this example, it says, we noticed your tickets in section 118, row 20 are currently posted for resale for our game. We identified your tickets as a good candidate to return for Magic money based on characteristics of your resale postings. In other words, your tickets aren't going to sell online. Why don't you trade them in for some store credits? But no human is sitting there writing it. Now, the human wrote the template and envisioned the possible narratives from the data sets they had access to, but the machine can actually do all this on its own at scale. So it could send 10,000 individualized emails 5 hours before the game if it was trained to do so. Skyward would be an example where they're actually surfacing recommended content now. So if you're on a site and you're reading one thing, it'll surface another. That's a lot of people are doing it. That's a really logical entry point for most software companies, is to try and build recommendation engines to surface content. You see things like that, and then even beyond that with Salesforce, which even I think Dreamforce is this week. They announce all kinds of things with artificial intelligence. They've made massive investments, billions of dollars they've put into artificial intelligence. So they'll do content recommendations by segments and patterns, and then a host of other things that have tied into their Einstein platform. Promotion, again, kind of a hard one, but a lot of people are trying to crack this and trying to create tools to help with promotion. One example, now again, I've actually spent time with the founder of Cortex and the guys over there. Really interesting company. I haven't used this, so I don't know if it actually delivers on the promise, but this is the perfect example to show what AI should be able to do. And I know that they've been investing in this now for years. So in this case, when you go to publish a social media share, right now, most of us probably come up with what to share. We figure out what picture to use. We pick a hashtag. It's all very manual for a single tweet or Instagram post or LinkedIn share, whatever, that may not even create a ton of value. Well, in the case of AI, it'll actually recommend the most effective colors to use. It'll recommend keywords. It'll recommend what time to send it out. And this isn't someone did a study 2 years ago and decided 2 p.m. on Tuesdays is the optimal time to send tweets, which means every marketer is now sending their tweets at 2 p.m. on Tuesdays, which makes it no longer optimal. This is the machine constantly getting smarter on your data set and knowing that your audience actually is most likely to interact at 10 a.m. on this day. And that's the difference with AI. It's not a single fixed time point where a set of data was created that said do this. It's a machine constantly learning on its own what to do and then making those recommendations to you. OneSpot is another company that does something where they'll create content on your site. They actually do auto tagging of images on your site. They'll recommend content on the site. They'll do retargeting and remarketing off-site based on users that you're trying to get to. They'll drive new targeted users based on lookalikes. So again, it's using all kinds of AI to do these things and optimize cross-channel. Sentient Technology is actually a company that was built as AI for a hedge fund, and they've now moved into the marketing space. And the perfect example here is if you were to run A/B testing on a landing page as a marketer, you figure it all out. You figure out what's creative, what color call to action button to use, what to write, how many people to surface option A to versus option B to. Then you run the test and you see which one worked. Like, there's a lot of work that goes into A/B testing. And honestly, humans shouldn't be doing it. It is a perfect example of something a machine should absolutely be running. And like, everybody always wants to know, like, am I going to lose my job? If your job is A/B testing landing pages, yes, you're going to lose your job. But it's a very specific niche use case. So that is something you should absolutely be looking at. If you're doing A/B testing of online content, whether it's on your website or in emails, that is something that will absolutely be intelligently automated very soon for most people. And then Another example of one of the more advanced AI tools on the market would be Albert. And what they'll do is it's online advertising, autonomous online advertising. So the human develops the creative for the ads and uploads variations of that creative. And then the human sets the budget. And then from there, Albert takes over. And Albert mixes and matches the creative and infinite A/B tests. It figures out, Google, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, like it'll run the ads for you, and then it'll optimize in real time to shift your money to the channels that are having the most success. So their minimum ad spend, I think, is $20K a month. So you can't use this as a small business. But if you're a mid-market to larger enterprise and you're spending north of $20K a month, then you may be like Sabella and get rid of your media buying agency and move everything to Albert. So this was from October of 16, where they said, yeah, we're just done working with human-run digital agencies. We're going to use Albert because it just works better. And then the final is performance, and then we'll go kind of into Q&A with a couple of final thoughts. So this is probably the earliest. I would say planning and performance are close to the most immature, but performance is probably even earlier than planning, in part because the insights piece is really hard. It's hard for the machine to figure out what the data really means and what to do about it. It can tell you, though, at a far more efficient way what happened. So kind of the what, but not the why and what to do about it next. So we've been using natural language generation for about 2 years now to do our Google Analytics reports. And what this does is we used to have our consultants would spend anywhere from probably 5 to 10 hours, depending on the client, each month, analyzing what happened on their site, looking at the Google Analytics reports, and then creating narrative around them, writing the reports of what happened. And then you would probably have a senior person say, okay, why did that happen and what are we going to do about it? So lots of time would go into this. We now use a tool that enables us to just connect a Google Analytics account to the NLG engine. You hit a button and it instantaneously generates like a 7 to 8 page narrative of everything that happened on the site. So again, the what happened. It does not tell us why did it happen per se, or what should we do about it, but we've reduced our time per client by like 80% just using NLG to write the reports. Bots is an area like you're seeing a lot of. You hear a lot about bots within this space. So Dharmesh Shah is one of the co-founders of HubSpot. Last year, I think he debuted this Built Growth Bot, and Growth Bot actually connects to your Google Analytics account, your HubSpot account. It can connect to a lot of different analytics sources, and you can actually just ask Growth Bot, how was traffic in August? And it'll spit back a reply. Give me a traffic summary for last week, and it spits back a reply. Now, it's been coded to give you these sources, but the AI part of this is the understanding what you're asking. So it's actually using natural language processing to figure out what you're asking, and then it's using natural language generation to create responses. So it's types of AI, but there's efforts being made to make that far smarter. And then to give you a sense of how significant that area is, Google itself has been working on similar tools for Google Analytics. So now most people, I think, have access to it. It just debuted a couple months ago. If you go into your insights area within analytics, you can ask it questions. So things like, what is the trend of session duration in New York City last month, or which referral sources bring the most users, and it'll spit out replies. So a kind of a hack to make this really valuable is come up with the 10 questions you want to ask of your analytics data every month, and then just ask Google those 10 questions, and you'll have your report. So this is an example of where it's going. Again, these aren't super intelligent in that they tell you how to make anything better, but they're a good sign of where we're headed. So how do you get started? There's a lot of information, a lot of examples, a lot of tools. My best recommendation is always to pick a single use case. So pick one thing that you spend a ton of time on, or that's really data-driven and heavy that no one really wants to be doing anyway, and go find a tool that maybe does it, or go talk to the core companies in your tech stack, like a HubSpot or a Salesforce or whomever it is, wherever your CRM and automation tools are, and go find out if there's more intelligent capabilities that they already have or are building that you could be integrating. So then I'll just kind of close out with a couple of thoughts. So will machines replace us? Will they enable us to create content at scale? In some cases, yes. Very limited cases like A/B testing of landing pages, don't want to be doing that. But for the most part, it's going to enhance doing. It's going to give you knowledge and abilities you've never had as a marketer, and in reality it can actually be a massive competitive advantage. It can be a superpower for you. So while other marketers are afraid to get started and don't want to learn this stuff, the ones that sort of take the leap and really start embracing it and understanding it, they're going to have competitive advantages for their brands and in their own careers. And so with that, I think we've left some time for Q&A, and I'll turn it back over to Susan to guide us there.
Wow, Paul, that was really fabulous. Thanks so much. I appreciate your take on a lot of these things. I liked your emphasis at the beginning on how you don't necessarily have to understand everything about AI in order to see some of its use cases. So thanks so much for for laying some of those cases out for us. I appreciate that. I learned a ton. Thank you. I'm also sort of laughing at the phrase, honestly, humans shouldn't be doing it. So anyway, I appreciate that. So here are a couple questions. Is there an opportunity to use AI to create aggregator type of content for a website or an email newsletter that basically pulls the most popular content pieces from a predefined topic, like career advice, into one place?
Yes, that would actually be a use case for Curata, one of the examples I showed, and there's other curation tools on the market, but that's what they do is you find topics of interest to you, and then their machines, their algorithms will actually surface the most popular content around those topics, and they'll aggregate it together, and then they even tie it into like a CMS where you could just edit it and publish it right in their platform. So that, yes, that's a perfect use case if you're trying to establish thought leadership in a certain area, or if you're trying to, aggregate the best content on a topic to create value for your audiences. You would be looking at a content curation tool. Would be the name of the category you would want to go looking for.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. That's really helpful. I think too, at BuzzSumo we have a layer as well that will tell you what's trending, and I know that that's powered by some of these algorithms. And I think it makes sense if you think about the alternative, which would be a person clicking through the web constantly to see what's getting the most shares. It's, I think a pretty clear case where machines can do things a little bit more efficiently and definitely more quickly. Here's another question. I can see where curation linked to automated, let's see. Oh yeah, so I think this is sort of David looking for validation on this point. He says, I can see where curation linked to automated keyword research could transform content publishing. Are you seeing that happen in any places, Paul?
Yeah, I think, that's the kind of stuff you're seeing built into tools like the content strategy tool that HubSpot's using that I think will keep getting smarter, is not only is it looking at the content you've published on your own site, but in time it could start looking out to content on the web, and whether it pulls from a source like BuzzSumo or if it pulls from another API, where it goes and then also compares it to what's most interesting. Like I know you guys have that question tool on BuzzSumo, where you go in and just say, hey, artificial intelligence, and they'll tell you what's being asked across the web. Well, if you could have that information actually piped right into your content strategy tool, like now you're building really cool stuff. And I think it's a good point, because what you'll start to see is there's all these use cases. Like once you understand what AI is capable of doing, your mind will start saying, wow, what if I did this, or what if I did that? And you'll find that there are some tools, but you may actually come up with tools that still need to be built because it is so early. And the thing we didn't spend a lot of time on is AI is narrow in its intelligence. And what I mean by that is the things you see in the movies and on shows don't exist. These general intelligence sentient beings like in Ex Machina, or even in Star Wars, like the robots that can just talk, that does not exist. There's no such thing today as general intelligence where a machine is conscious and capable to like see and think about things in the way humans do. The machines have to be trained to do specific tasks. And so you can't go buy an AI platform that just has all these marketing use cases already built in. You actually would have to go buy like 10, 15, or 20 individual tools to do each use case you want to do. And that's a really hard thing for marketers right now. And it's going to be a challenging space for a while because of that. But that's the reality of where the technology is.
That's interesting. Yeah, you referred at a couple points, I think, during the presentation to teaching the algorithm. Could you describe a little bit more about what that process looks like and maybe even how that affects what a program is able to do?
Yeah, I mean, it is what it sounds like. It's literally human training to the machine, and it can be extremely time intensive. And so an example would be of one that was more efficient was me training Apple's Photos app to recognize my daughter. So when it gave me, it showed me the first picture and I said, that's Isla. And then the next 12, it actually got right. It found 12 more of her. And so now its confidence level that it knew who she was high. Had it showed me 6 pictures of her and 6 pictures of somebody else that wasn't her, I would have gone through and X'd out the ones that weren't her. And now the machine was trained. It's like, oh, okay, so those aren't her. And whatever facial features it was thinking were an indicator it was her, it's now going to learn to extract that from future recommendations. So in that case, I'm training it. Another example would be like if you have a song, if you have Pandora or something like that, and a song comes on and you hit like, and another one comes on and you hit X, like I don't like it. You're training the system what to present to you. And each time you say you don't like something or that you do like something, it learns a little bit more about you and alters what it delivers to you moving forward. So those are some more of your personal life examples, but now you can imagine the same thing happening on, like, let's say a recommendation engine for your site. If you have something that starts recommending content to people based on their behaviors, and you go in and you monitor what it's recommending, and you'd be like, yeah, I would not have recommended that piece of content to that person. It has nothing to do with what they're looking at. You could in theory go in and say, don't surface that one again. And now the machine shouldn't just not show that one. It should now learn on its own everything else that's like the one that you just said don't show it, and extract that from future recommendations. So again, the key on the AI is like it needs to be taught a lot of times, but then it gets smarter on its own. You don't have to go set 50 rules. You set a rule that says this is not her, or don't show this, and then it'll take that and apply it to all its future learnings.
Is that phrase, it will get smarter itself, is that a key differentiator between different levels of artificial intelligence?
That is the core principle of machine learning. So when we talk about like AI umbrella and then machine learning on its own, the machine getting smarter is basically the premise behind machine learning. The different technologies and algorithms that are used in machine learning, it's to enable the machine to improve its own thinking and paths. And then deep learning uses what are called neural nets to actually train the machine much more like a human brain would process stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, so when you're training an algorithm or teaching an algorithm, is there an industry standard of accuracy that people generally say? And if so, is it something like when it gets to 80% accurate, that's good. When it gets to 100%, that's good. Is there a standard? And if there is, what is it?
That's a really good question. Not that I'm aware of, and I would say probably because it varies by industry. So healthcare is a huge one right now. Like IBM Watson is partnering with hospital systems and cancer institutes around the country and around the world to give added layers of knowledge and capabilities to doctors. And in those cases, they probably really want a very high level of accuracy, the probability of the answer being correct. If you get into marketing strategy, it's probably more of like, there's an 80% chance doing this would help. And then the marketer is going to provide a lot more human level intelligence over it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to vary. Like even going back to 2011, I mentioned IBM Watson winning on Jeopardy. Watson had no idea what the answer actually was. Like Watson doesn't know the correct answer to the question. Watson knows based on the tens of millions of sources of information it consumed in preparation for that, it can deduce the probability of an answer being correct. And so in their case, they probably set a threshold that's like, if Watson is 93% confident or above, ring the bell and answer the question. If it's below 93%, don't answer it in these scenarios. Or, so that's where you can do all kinds of things around when do you respond based on probabilities.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess we have to figure out too, for humans, what is our acceptable accuracy rate? And I think it probably mirrors what you described as well. In healthcare, we expect a heavier degree of accuracy. Yeah, so here's a question. Google AdWords is upgrading, and that's in quotes, accounts to automatically generate ads. But Google wants to also generate lots of extraneous clicks. What do you think about the conflicts of interest in some of these AI deployments, i.e. when artificial intelligence might not be so good for the consumer, but good for the corporations behind the algorithm?
That's a really smart question. Yeah, I mean, obviously Google has its motivations. So certainly by making the creation and purchasing of ad space easier, it creates the probability that you will spend more and do more with them. And if they can figure out ways to use their massive amounts of data on people who have Google accounts and to better target them and get them to take more actions, that obviously bodes well for Google. There is the consideration down the road that as all of us start developing more and more intelligent capabilities and get better and better and better at targeting people at a very personal level, will it have some kickback ramifications on our likelihood to respond to those ads, or maybe we eventually become numb to them, will create too much noise. And I don't know. I mean, those are really cool thought experiments to kind of go down the path of that question and say, well, what's going to happen? And the reality is most people have no idea, because most technology is nowhere near as smart as what Google has. Google is certainly, there's probably 5 to 10 companies in the world right now that are leading on artificial intelligence, and Google would be right at the top of that list. So the things they're doing are things that you won't be seeing in other marketing software solutions anytime soon. But it's the kind of question that whoever asked that is obviously connecting the dots on what this stuff is and where it's going to take us. And I don't necessarily have the answers for stuff like that, but they're the kinds of things that I enjoy thinking about.
Yeah. Good. So I think this touches a little bit on that. What skills should marketers be learning now to stay relevant in the age of marketing artificial intelligence?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question, isn't it?
Right.
No, that's, it's funny. I've given this talk, or variations of the talk, many, many times. And sometimes I'll talk about my kids, and I have a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old. And people have asked me, like, well, what will you advise your kids to do? Like, if AI is going to do everything for us in the next 10 to 15 years, like, what will you even tell your kids to do? And I think it was like, man, when my daughter goes into college in 13 years, like, what will it look like? What opportunities will there be? What won't be done by machines? And I would say, like, in marketing now and even in the future, creativity is uniquely human. So the machines aren't creative. They can be trained to do things that appear as though they have creativity, but they don't. So creativity isn't going anywhere. Qualitative storytelling isn't going anywhere. Like, you can teach machines how to write data-driven stories. You can't teach them how to write movie scripts or plays or poems or songs to a degree. Like, there are fringe ones that are trying to do those things, but generally speaking, that qualitative storytelling isn't going anywhere. Strategy, honestly, isn't going anywhere anytime soon. You're just going to have capabilities and knowledge to build strategies that you couldn't fathom. Like, AI will dramatically enhance your ability to build strategies, but it's not going to build them for you anytime soon. So I think anything with strategy and creativity are 2 core, uniquely human areas that aren't going to change.
Interesting. That's great. Well, David chimed in and said that accuracy requirements are a balance of value and risk. And I think that is a good answer about accuracy requirements, and a thoughtful approach maybe to artificial intelligence in our job roles. We need to balance value and also understand and intelligently respond to some of the risks that new technologies create for people.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good thought. And the other thing I would add is I tend to look at every tool and every application of AI on what we're generically calling a marketer to machine scale. And what I mean by that is a one is all human all the time. So, email subject lines. If you assess your own marketing right now and you look at each use case and say, okay, writing email subject line, that's a one. It's all human all the time. A five would be fully autonomous. So no human interaction whatsoever. Like right now on Wall Street, 70% of all trades are made fully autonomously. Like machines make those trades with no human interaction. We are not even, the most advanced AI tools in marketing I've seen are probably at a 3. And I don't see them getting to a 4 or 5 anytime soon. So none of these use cases are fully autonomous, meaning you're just going to set it and forget it. It's always going to be like, okay, here's probabilities. Now, human, you make the decisions. But at best, you may see some getting into that 3.5 to 4 range in the near future. But most use cases, most tools are going to be a 2 to a 3 on that level.
So Wendy is asking, I think this will be our last question. She wanted more clarification on what marketers should do now. It sounds like one of the things you said is focus on strategy and creativity. Are there other things that you would suggest?
Yeah, so I would say that I just flipped it back to this, but that idea of a single use case. So if you think about the 5 Ps we just went through and probably the 12 or 15 use cases within there, if there was one that you thought to yourself, man, I spent a ton of time on that exact thing every month, that's a starting point. Like I would look at your time and money each month and say, where am I putting a whole bunch of time now that I know what AI is capable of? If I assume there is a tool out there to do that for me, or at least do part of that, that's where I would start. So figuring out what to share on social media, coming up with blog post topics, like whatever those things are that are just super manual that should be informed by data, that's a starting point. And the other thing is just if you're intrigued by this topic and this is kind of like triggered in your mind, like, wow, this is really going to be something, then I would go start learning it. Like I would read Automate This. We try and curate a ton of the best stuff on our AI Institute site, but there's other sites out there and other thought leaders where you just want to start immersing yourself in it so you become more comfortable with the terminology and the capabilities, and you'll start finding those starting points yourself from there.
That's great. Wow. Well, this has been a really helpful session, Paul. I appreciate your expertise, your thoughtfulness, and your willingness to bring a question that I think plagues some people in the middle of the night in a frightening way into the light of conversation, discussion, and it's just been a really useful session. So thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you everybody for attending.